Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back with the Truth Attack. So, let's just get right into this. We are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support to the members of the listening audience to keep the broadcast network operating. So, if you enjoy the shows, the information, the discussions, the lectures, the guests, and the hosts on the other shows on the network, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com website. Get signed up as a monthly subscribing member. Even if it's as little as $15, $20 a month, every membership helps, and we do need the support of the broadcast listening audience to keep the network operating. So there you go. And if you want to get fully informed on my favorite topic on this particular show every Thursday evening at 6 o'clock, you find your way over to taxfreedom.com and start reading, where I have put up the articles and the information that expose the fact the federal income tax has been a fraud, a complete and total fraud since World War II. And we're going to talk about that more tonight after I get through a little bit of current events. So, taxfreedom.com to get educated, irszoom.com to get assistance answering IRS correspondence administratively or answering the Department of Justice in court, because they have no arguments left in court. They have nothing left to do except continue trying to lie, obviously lie, to the court and to the juries. And they're not going to be able to get away with it much longer. Word is getting out of the extent of the fraud that has been perpetrated on the American people since World War II, and I'm going to get into that tonight. Again, some more from a different perspective. Okay, what do we got happening? Well, economically, things are stabilizing. The stock market, even though it's at an all-time high, approaching 50,000, I don't think it's too overblown. It has pulled back a couple of times and just pushes forward. It's like I've said in the past, with some $8 trillion sitting in money market accounts on the sidelines looking for somewhere to go. As interest rates come down, the bonds look less and less appealing. Who wants 3%? And the stock market, people, who wants to put it in at 50,000, an all-time high. So the money is sitting there on the sidelines. Every time the market pulls back, either the NASDAQ or the Dow, it immediately bounces up again as some of the money sitting on the sidelines sees a buy-in opportunity, because right now, the economy is looking like it's going to get stronger. First of all, on Wall Street, they're booming. The earnings are up, the stock prices are up, the expectations are up, the capital access is up, the projects to be built out are up. Institutionally, America is on the verge of a real boom. Wall Street, Main Street, is still struggling a bit because of the lack of access to capital and the lack of the job hiring that will result as all these new projects for infrastructure and energy take time to gin up and get going. So employment will get stronger as those infrastructure projects come on board. Meanwhile, oil is down at below $60 a barrel. Inflation is below 3%. Gas is down, falling lower. In Oklahoma, it was under $2. Around the country, it's less than $3. And diesel is generally substantially cheaper everywhere except California, where the insanity of the California legislature and the governor's office have passed so many regulations, burdensome, onerous, sick, that 2 refineries have shut down. California is losing its ability to domestically produce the gasoline and diesel that it needs. It's going to have to start importing all of it by boat. Because they'll shut down the refineries. They can't make money. They can't survive in the regulatory environment that California has set up. So just like billionaires leaving because of the impending 5% tax, which is completely unconstitutional, you can't just pick out the billionaires and go take 5% of their property. If you're going to take 5%, you got to take everybody 5%, not just the billionaires. So that's going to fall. But the insanity in California is driving the price of gasoline higher. Well, all around the rest of the country, it's falling to the best it's been in 5 years. So economically, most of the country looks good and is going to build out and get stronger. They're predicting right now a 5% possible GDP growth. That's up from Biden's like -1 or 1.5, depending upon which year you look at. So growth is up, interest rates are coming down, which is good for access capital for Main Street and Wall Street. And things are looking up. So even though Main Street is struggling right now, and the liberals, of course, don't want to admit any of this is happening. You look at the liberals, the only thing that matters is keeping criminal Venezuelans in the country. Oh yeah, and Somalis, keeping criminal, fraudulent Somalis in the country. They don't want anyone, no matter how violent or how criminal or how much fraud they don't want anyone to be kicked out for the crimes they committed. I should tell you what the Democrats' plan is. It's to allow as much crime as possible, to allow as much chaos and anarchy in society as possible, to convince the American people to call out for the government to step in and solve the chaos and the anarchy that the Democrats created with their violent, ultraviolet left wing. It's the red shirts and communist China and Nazi youth in Germany, creating the chaos and the energy, calling for the socialization and socialist takeover of the country. That's generally the plan, and it's the communistic plan. That's how they've operated from China, Cuba, Venezuela. It starts with the students and the youth and a call for change, which turns into a tyrant taking over and killing the youth that spoke too eloquently after the revolution. Okay, so what else have we got? Oh, the Supreme Court took up the case of the arguments on the boys participating in girls' sports. And from the way questioning went, it sure looks like the Supreme Court is going to allow the states at issue in this case to ban boys, transgenders, from participating in girls' sports in those states. The question of what will happen in the states where that's being allowed has not been addressed, and that will have to be addressed in a different case because that wasn't the question here. The question here was whether or not the states have the power to ban those persons from girls' sports. And I think it's pretty clear that this is a state's issue and that they got it right. On the other side, when the liberal states come to the court arguing they have the right to do it, I think you get a different resolution than states' rights control in that case, and here's why. To address that issue, you're looking at Title IX, which is the original legislation the suits are being brought under, which was passed into law in 1972. In 1972, there was no discussion, argument, or confusion about what was a boy and what was a girl. And you have to look to the original intent of the original legislation, the original intent of Congress in writing the original legislation. And in this case, the original intent was for girls to be protected and have opportunity within certain spaces and activities. Now, what determines a boy and a girl in 1972? Well, that was done scientifically, based on chromosomes. And that's how you have to settle any real case on this issue. In order for Title IX to protect girls, you have to define girl. The only way to define girl or woman is XX. That's the genetic chromosomal makeup of 99.9999999% of the females on this planet. XY is male, XX is female. Therefore, in order to determine under Title IX whether someone is allowed to participate in sports, you have to look to the chromosomal genetic makeup. The liberals won't like that because that doesn't let you change genders. But if you change genders, you have boys pushing the girls out of the safe places and out of sports entirely, ultimately. So if you want to apply Title IX under the original intent, which was to protect biological females, the only way to settle it is to look to the genetic chromosomal makeup of the individual person. XY, you're out. Go compete with the boys. Yeah, we think it's a shame that we agree that no one should be prevented from competing. But we don't think anyone should be allowed to compete against the other gender simply because they don't think they'll do so well competing against their own gender. They want to win. Well, everybody wants to win, but you don't get to push girls out so that you can win. That's what they do in Islam, right? That's the Islamic practice. Push girls out, lock them up, keep them clothed, no education, no going out, no driving, no shopping, make them slaves. And you'll end up with the same result. Women will be pushed out if boys are allowed in. So the only proper way to settle this is going to the chromosomal makeup of each individual person, XX and XY. And yeah, okay, 1 in 10 million might be able to argue either way, genetically. And in those cases, you'll have to decide on a case-by-case basis what's appropriate. Someone who's 5 foot tall with an XXY genetic makeup might reasonably be classified as female in competition. Someone who's 6'6" and weighs 280 pounds, they're probably male. Okay, so that's extreme ends of the hypothetical. As I was saying, to settle this properly, you got to go to chromosomal makeup, and that is what will put in place the original intent of Title IX. Okay, so what else we got? We got Minneapolis, the liberals in Minnesota going absolutely crazy. I said last week, I think, that what they were doing amounts to insurrection. And lo and behold, Donald Trump says this week, if Minnesota state authorities don't get this tamped down and controlled so that they have peaceful protests, which they're allowed to do, rather than violent assaults of ICE in the middle of working, Trump is going to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow him to deploy the National Guard to control the crowds in place of the Minnesota state authorities, and might even allow him to arrest people like Tim Walz that has been instigating the insurrection. On one night, he's out there telling people to go out and fight and obstruct and make video records. Well, not quite fight and obstruct, but take video records and protest. And the next morning, he's asking Donald Trump to tone it down. What a lying hypocrite this piece of crap is. Maybe Trump should have him arrested and indicted for aiding and abetting and inciting insurrection. And the crowds are going to learn real quick if the National Guard comes out, they will be treated like insurrectionists. And they should be, given that the Democratic Party turned around and prosecuted all those mostly peaceful protesters from the Capitol on January 6th. Walking through the halls of the Capitol is insurrection. Certainly driving your car into an ICE agent is. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. I hear the first commercial break coming up. Get over to the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com website. Get signed up as a subscribing member. We'll be back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and we're just going to get right back into this. When we left off, I was talking about the protests, the riots, the opposition, the violent opposition of the liberal left to ICE doing its job of removing the criminal element, illegal aliens who were let in by the millions during the Biden administration without vetting. And, that's what we voted for, was to stop the crime, to stop the unmitigated, unopposed crime. And even in California, they've started to address shoplifting, not by the state, but by the people themselves. So it's, the liberals are just out of touch. And of course, they're not sincere either, are they? Because the liberals are organized and literally professional protesters because they're being paid. It's pretty obvious they're organized by outside sources because in these liberal riots all over the country, from Boston to Los Angeles, on the same day, within 8 hours, they all have the same signs to take out in protest. Professionally printed and distributed within 8 hours all over the country. Now, that's not how it's being done. It's being done professionally in each part of the country as a coordinated effort. And it's being funded. And that is insurrection, to fund the violent opposition to the government at work. So not only should the protesters be subject to arrest and prosecution as insurrectionists, but the people funding it should be traced. And they should be attacked for aiding and abetting. Because that's what it's all about, keeping illegal aliens in the country so that they will vote for Democrats. And they'll get seats in the Congress and electoral votes in the elections that change the outcome of American politics by giving political power to illegal aliens and foreigners instead of citizens. And that's the Democrat plan. That's why they have no money for the homeless, no money for the black neighborhoods or their schools. All the money goes to the illegal aliens so that their votes can be secured for the next 10 years. To prevent California from losing more seats and electoral votes. To prevent New York from losing more seats and electoral votes. To prevent Illinois, Maryland, Connecticut, New Jersey, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, all these places where liberal politics have made the state an insane place to live. The people are leaving to go to nearby, saner places like Idaho, Montana, Texas, the Dakotas, Florida, Tennessee, where they're gaining seats and electoral votes. So this is the Democrat plan, to replace the black demographic as their most important demographic that they cater to, because that population is shrinking. It's gone from 18 to 13% in the last 15, 20 years. Meanwhile, the Hispanic demographic, the illegal demographic, has gone from like 8 to 30, or I don't know, 25, 20. One is shrinking, the other is expanding. The Democrats are changing their demographical affiliation, and they're using the money to buy the votes and hoping the black population doesn't notice. They're not on the priority list anymore. They've been relegated to the basement as the serfs whose labor funds the Democrat Party liberal takeover, communist takeover of America. And yes, communists. Look who leads them. Bernie Sanders, openly socialist communist. Elizabeth Warren, openly socialist. Mamdani in New York, although he just got shut down with his let's take the property plan. They immediately stepped in and tried to seize couple $100 million worth of property being bought in the bankruptcy sale, and Mom Domi tried to step in and say, "Oh, we got a new executive order now where he in New York get first rights to buy anything." And the federal district court said, "Shut up and sit down, you idiot. You've got nothing. You've got nothing." And they approved the sale to the private party and told Mom Domi to go sit on it. This was a federal judge appointed by Biden who told the socialists in New York, "Screw you. Nobody's taking private property in this city." His whole promise was a lie. Can't do the buses for free, and you ain't taking no property. Nor are you getting first rights for the city to buy. So his whole plan just got slammed in the first month. Okay, so what do we got left? Oh, the Iranian Revolution. You know, the people in Iran have been revolting, literally rebelling, peacefully protesting in the streets against Khomeini. It's not clear if he's even still in the country. There are rumors that he's already fled to Russia, fearing another move from the U.S. like they pulled with Maduro, dropping in unexpectedly one evening and taking off with the leader of the country to be tried criminally in New York. So he's not appearing anywhere. And my understanding is the regime police forces are beginning to shift their affiliations and supporting the Iranian people rather than cracking down on them and shooting. And Trump, of course, threatens to intervene if the regime began killing and executing, which they had already done. But now it seems like they're backing off because I think Israel and the Middle East and other partners, probably Saudi Arabia and Qatar, are telling them that you go into Iran and get involved, you'll destabilize the region. It kind of looks like the people are going to get this done this time. Just let it play out in Iran. And you'll have a new partner, because that's what Iran will reject everything that's been done and want the U.S. to help develop the oil resources the same way we're helping Venezuela, which again would go to cheaper energy all around the planet and theoretically a stable Middle East for the first time in 50 years, because of course it is Iran that has been funding Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. That's all Iran. That's all Iranian oil money funding terrorist activity all over the planet to interfere with transportation through the Houthis and interfering with transportation in the Red Sea and the canal access. And of course, Hamas, which is dedicated to destroying Israel and killing every Jew. No two-state solution's acceptable in Hamas. The only solution is to replace Israel with a new Arab state called Palestine so that they can kill all the Jews just like Adolf Hitler. Yeah, who's the Nazi, the liberal or the conservative? You tell me after you think about it. Okay, so let's hope that succeeds and Khomeini gets kicked out, because Islam is not a good government form. It's the insanity of the despot and unquestioned loyalty to whatever insanity the despot blurts out. And of course, the religion advocates for murdering those who are not of the religion. And, I don't think that's of God. I think that's satanic. So let's just leave it there and move on. All right, let's talk about the tax, right? How many different ways can we identify that the federal income tax is completely and totally unconstitutional? Well, first of all, it's not a direct tax. And that, of course, is what the IRS, the DOJ, and the lower courts, all the circuit courts, have been telling the American people since basically World War II, but particularly in court precedents that they've cited since then in 1980. Oh, it is absolutely certain. There's no question it's all been knocked down. Any other argument is frivolous. It's a direct tax without limitation under the 16th Amendment. I'm sorry, but when Congress enacted the new income tax law in December of 2017, they wrote a constitutional authority statement that says the income tax is authorized by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. That's indirect taxation. The new law was authorized as an indirect tax. 181, impost, duty, excise. And the Supreme Court said in Moore at Oxford, United States, a year and a half ago in 2024, that income taxes are indirect taxes. So they lied to you for 75 years, 80 years. They lied to you about it being a direct tax. That's unconstitutional. Why? Because direct taxes have to be apportioned to the states for payment. They can never ask you to pay a direct tax. It's unconstitutional. Why is it direct? Because it's claimed that you owe it as a function of earning money. Every dollar you earn, the government gets 25 cents. You're a slave. They could raise it to 90 cents. They could raise it to 100%. What would you do then? What would you do then? This is why the Constitution doesn't allow you to be taxed directly, because it would be impossible to apportion any such tax to the states unless it's a fixed amount per person's head, like 20 bucks a head, 50 bucks a head, $100 a head. State could pay that, but they can never pay 20% of everything made by every person in the state. So they lied to you about it being a direct tax. And they lied to you about it being an unlimited tax, because that's what they say. It's a non-apportioned, unlimited tax under the 16th Amendment. And that's a lie. In Moore, the Supreme Court said all direct taxes must and still and have always been required to be apportioned to the states for payment in proportion to the last census. That means if they want, and the first thing you have to do in order to apportion the tax to the state is announce how much you're raising. Because what are you supposed to tell California? You pay 10%? You had 10% of the population in the last census, pay 10%. California's going to say 10% of what? Everything. No. You need to fix a number. That's why in order to have a direct tax, Congress has to enact a tax of, say, like, let's make it easy, $1 billion. And then if the last census showed that California had 10% of the population, they would be responsible, the state of California, for 10% of the $1 billion. So they would get a bill for $100 million. Now the state can pay it any way that is within the law for them to raise the money. They can take it out of the treasury, they could put up a toll, they could erect a special sales tax, they could enact any kind of tax or assessment to raise money that's within state law, or they could issue a bond. So the state can take any way it wants to pay the tax, but it has to be paid by the state. A direct tax cannot be laid at your doorstep because you earned money. That's unconstitutional. So it's not direct, and it's not unlimited. Oh, and guess what? It's also not indirect. It's supposed to be an indirect tax, but the only authorized forms of indirect taxation are impost, duty, and excise. Impost taxes foreign persons and imported goods from foreign countries. Impost taxes foreign activity. Duties tax exports and only exports. That's why we have duty-free shops at the airport. Excises tax commodities, licenses, and corporations. There's no authority to tax the labor of American people under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. There's no authority to tax the labor of the American people in the form of an indirect tax. It doesn't exist. It's a constitutional fraud. Okay, so it's not direct, it's not unlimited, and it's not a legitimate indirect tax. We'll be back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just hop right back into this. As we came up on that commercial break, I was going through as many different possible ways that we can identify as to why the income tax is unconstitutional, completely and totally. And we found that one, it's not a direct tax, which is what they have been enforcing against you since World War II and the victory tax, which was an unconstitutional direct tax, but only lasted for 2 years, and because of the war, nobody complained. They got away with it. So they set up the same system after that tax expired. They set up the same system of withholding by allowance on a W-4 without ever imposing any new tax. They let you assume you were subject either to the previous tax that had expired, the victory tax, or that you were now subject somehow magically to a tax in 1913 that had never applied to you before World War II and the victory tax. Oh, but magically now you're subject. Yeah, right. That's all fraud. It's not direct, it's not unlimited, and it's not a legitimate indirect tax because it's not imposed as a function of impost taxation of foreign persons in America, foreign imported goods into America, or all persons in a foreign place, like a territory or possession, or in a foreign country under a tax treaty. Impost tax foreign activity, and the labor of the American people is not foreign, not subject to any impost taxation at all, unless it's in a foreign country under tax treaty. Duties tax exported goods. The labor of the American people cannot possibly be construed to be an exported goods. It's not a duty. Excises are the taxation of the manufacture, consumption, and sale of commodities within the country, things like alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They're taxes on licenses to pursue certain occupations, like alcohol, tobacco, and firearm sales. And excise taxes are taxes on the corporate privilege, where it is the privilege of the corporation that is the subject of the tax, not the mere earning of money, which would be direct taxation. It's the incorporation, the privilege of handling commodities, having a license, operating as a corporation with certain advantages. But excise doesn't tax the labor of the American people either. So if income taxes are indirect taxes under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, and no new powers are conferred by the 16th Amendment because there's no enabling enforcement clause in the amendment to constitutionally authorize Congress to write new law to enforce a new power. So there can be no new power construed to exist as an enforceable taxing power because Congress isn't authorized to write law. That means it can't be a direct tax. That would be a new power, a direct tax without limitation. And it can't be a new form of indirect taxation. Income isn't a fourth form because Congress isn't authorized to write new law for a fourth form. So what does that make income? It makes it what the Supreme Court said it was in the 1880s. The mechanism that measures the amount of tax owed. It's not the object of the tax or the subject of taxation. Profit, income, is the mechanism that measures the amount of tax owed on the taxable earnings derived from the taxable activities or transactions conducted by the person, which transactions or activities were subject to indirect federal taxation by impost, duty, or excise. And labor isn't included. Labor is not a taxable commodity, taxable by excise. Obviously, you can't argue the labor of the American people is foreign and subject to impost taxation. You can't argue it's an exported good subject to duty taxation. So the only possible way to argue labor of the American people conducted by right within the 50 states would be subject to federal taxation is either directly, which the states would have to pay, not the individuals, or indirectly, as excise, arguing labor is a commodity. Oh, but wait a minute. The labor unions saw the government coming. In the 30s, when they began to implement Social Security, the labor unions said, oh my God, they're going to tax our labor. And they said, well, the only way to do that would be to claim labor as a commodity subject to excise taxation. So the labor unions had Congress write and enact Title 15, Section 18, which says the labor of a human being is not a commodity or article of commerce. And by that statute, the labor of citizens conducted within the 50 states is 100% completely removed from all legal subjectivity to federal excise taxation. And it's already removed from impost and duty unless you're laboring in a territory, possession, or a foreign country under tax treaty, which we'll get to in a minute, because that's where Section 61 originated, is under a tax treaty. It never had any domestic application. So, you have no new powers, no new subjects, no authority to write law. It's not direct, it's not unlimited, and it's not legitimately indirect. So that means what we now have is a tax that is neither apportioned nor uniform, because the income tax, as an indirect tax, is graduated with tax brackets, and that's not a uniform tax on citizens. So why do we have graduated taxes instead of uniform taxation as required by the Constitution? Well, if you remember, indirect impost, duty, and excises before the 16th Amendment could not possibly apply to citizens. They only applied to privileged persons in the form of the corporate person, the licensed person, or the foreign person. And what the court ruled in the 1880s is that the use of graduated tax brackets is constitutional because Congress has the power to discriminate against the inanimate commodities and articles of commerce subject to federal taxation, and to discriminate against the corporate person, the licensed person, and the foreign person based on how much return revenue was realized from the privilege possessed. So that a corporation that made $1 million selling alcohol, tobacco, or firearms, or conducting any other activity could be taxed at a higher rate than a business making only $10,000 a year. One could be taxed at 5%, the other could be taxed at 25%. And the graduated brackets of the inanimate commodities and articles of commerce and inanimate privileged persons is perfectly constitutional, provided a geographical uniformity was provided. What that means is, instead of intrinsic uniformity with every single person being treated the same under the law, it had to be geographical, which meant you could have tax brackets that would be legal as long as the brackets were uniformly enforced across all 50 states. New York, California, Texas, Miami, as long as the brackets were enforced in every state, graduated taxation was legitimate. And this was handed down before there was any federal taxation even conceived of the American people. Indirectly. Couldn't be done. Impost, duty, excise, that's all there is. And then in 1913, they implemented the income tax as a tariff act, the Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act of October 3rd, 1913, which is one form of an impost, which taxed foreign persons in America, which is why the labor of citizens was never subject to the tax. It only taxed foreign activity as an impost. And in 1918, they added Section 61 as part of a Canadian tax treaty, enacting an impost taxing American people on all their sources: interest, rent, dividends, compensation, alimony, commissions, annuities, everything less than 66 listed in Section 61 as gross income, subject to taxation as taxable income, was only legislation enacted with respect to the Canadian tax treaty. Section 61 has never been domestic legislation. But they didn't need domestic legislation for a direct tax, did they? It told you it was direct on all your sources: interest, rent, dividends, commissions. Oh, and that includes compensation and salaries and wages, even though salaries and wages aren't there because labor isn't taxed. But labor is taxed. Salaries, wages, and compensation, all three terms are taxed in Section 1441 when earned by a non-resident alien under the original legislation. Section 61 wasn't there. They copied Section 61 from Section 1441B, which is where the non-resident alien is taxed on all those sources. But in 1954, they removed wages and salaries from Section 61 when it was recodified from Section 22A in 1954. Why? Because they didn't want salaries and wages to be taxed. That would be unconstitutional. That would imply the taxation of labor. You want proof? Okay, why don't we go look at Title 26. Oh, where did it go? I just closed it. Okay, what was that? Subtitle C, bounce right over. Here it is, Federal Insurance Contribution, Tax on Employers, Subchapter B. Let's look at that. Now what that 31 is 11. In addition to other taxes, there is hereby imposed on every employer an excise tax. So this is the two-part Social Security tax, and in this first code section, 3111, Subchapter B of Chapter 21, it's an excise tax on the employer, taxing the privilege of incorporation. Well, here's subchapter A, taxes on employees, rate of tax. In addition to other taxes, there is hereby imposed on the income of every individual a tax equal to 6.2% of the wages. What kind of tax? Here the word excise has been removed. They're admitting there is no excise taxation of individuals. It's an income, a tax on income. Well, what is that? An impost, a duty, or an excise? Because whatever it is, it doesn't apply to the American people. It doesn't apply. What kind of tax is it? An impost, a duty? They removed excise. It's not an impost. Oh, it is an impost, isn't it? It only applies to foreign persons. There's no direct tax on employees. Only the employer can be taxed by excise on his employment of individuals. There is no other half of the tax that is constitutionally authorized to be applied to the citizens. It's the same tax. It's an excise when the employer pays it, but it's a what? Unspecified on the income. I'm sorry. It's an income, a taxing power that doesn't exist. Income is a yardstick, not an object or subject of taxation. It's unconstitutional to base the tax on gross income. It's unconstitutional to enforce graduated taxation against the American people. You want to know where graduated taxation comes from? I'll tell you. It's the same place where income taxation comes from. The second plank of the Communist Manifesto, which is what the treasonous federal judges in the lower courts have been enforcing against you since World War II. There's no constitutional taxation. This is communism, straight out of the frigging manifesto. Plank 2, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's where you find the taxation of labor. That's where you find class warfare of graduated tax brackets, non-uniformity. Divide the people, keep them fighting amongst themselves so they'll never notice. It's the government that's violating the law and looting the treasury. How do you think they become worth hundreds of millions of dollars? Well, printing trillions of dollars. Somehow it ends up in their pockets. So, it's not direct, it's not indirect, it's not unlimited, it's not apportioned, it's not uniform, it's graduated, it's not based on gross income, and there's no enabling enforcement clause. Anybody else got any ways it's unconstitutional? Let me know. We'll be back next week with more.